jobs are going away based off of the technology that we implement, and it's better highlighted in no other place than EV automakers. So I'm gonna go ahead and check out the video, and I hope that you guys go ahead and come and check it out with me, and let's continue the conversation. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit a like for the YouTube algorithm. Check out the Patreon. Link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat. Let's get into the video, ladies and gentlemen.
Leaders in Washington are trying to bring domestic manufacturing jobs back after a 40-year-long cycle of decline.
American auto companies, along with American labor, are committing their treasure and their talent to make electric vehicles all across America.
There's a lot of great stuff happening here in Michigan, and we are competing.
Rivian
I do not like the
$5 billion battery and assembly plant based just outside.
Let me say that I am not a fan of Governor Gretchen Whitmer. I think that she is one of the, I'm not going to say the worst governor, but absolutely is in a running for one of the worst governors in the United States of America, which is one of the reasons why we're making our permanent home in the not too near future. Hopefully she gets elected out, but we're making our permanent home to be Florida. I don't like her at all. I'm not a fan of her. I'm not a fan of how she does things, her policies. I think that she ran during the pandemic, was one of the worst ran states in the United States of America was Michigan, in my opinion.
Side of Atlanta.
There's a battle right now, and whether the companies want to admit it or the states want to admit it, like Michigan, they are battling for investments in automotive like they've never had to do before.
These changes could disrupt huge swaths of the Midwestern economy. Tens of thousands of people build parts for gasoline-powered engines in states like Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio.
What 1,000 workers took to construct in 1970, we can now construct with about 235, 240 workers.
1,000 people it used to take to make the vehicles that you drove. You literally had an assembly line of people putting together the products that we all know and love and consume, and they had a lot of quality issues because there's a lot of errors within humans. Think about that. Put that in perspective. 1,000 people, now you can do it with 240, 300 people. When you look at a lot of these, you need to go and look at the plants that Elon Musk has constructed. And it's mainly just robots. And there's a lot less moving parts in your cars now. You don't even have to change your oil anymore. The maintenance is less, which means that it's a trickle-down effect of what it takes and the workers and the economies that we put together. And so even if you look at Michigan, right, and you say, okay, well, Detroit was built for a city that housed 2 to 3 million people, and it's only 600,000-700,000 people inside of the city limits itself. Well, not only is that because of the policies from our lawmakers, but it's also as a result of the progress and technology that we make. And so you have to take that into consideration when you're saying, hey, you used to be able to come out of high school and just have a job and all of this other type of stuff. Well, now there's greater competition for higher paying jobs, and there's a decimation of the middle class because you need less people to do the tedious things that you can come out of high school and do. Let's continue.
At its height, nearly 20 million people worked in the manufacturing industry. Today, it's about 13 million. Workers could end up competing for a smaller pool of jobs that require a different set of skills.
The lines that run to drive oil or gas or any of a number of other fluids around an internal combustion engine aren't going to be there, don't have to be there.
Researchers believe that surging demand for EVs could force businesses to pivot quickly.
We find that this transition is already affecting workforce morale deeply. In some places, it's positive, there's hope for the future, but in many other places, or at the same time with some individuals, there is a lot of concern.
We've been working on products that we will manufacture in the future that will support not only electric vehicles, but other electric applications.
Can the U.S. auto industry weather the electric vehicle transition without leaving workers behind? And will this pivot be a boon or bust for people in the Midwest? The first thing to know is that electric vehicles and traditional cars are built in slightly different ways.
These jobs just are very different. So internal combustion engines, they have crankshafts, spark plugs, radiators, and the electric vehicle has the battery. So electric vehicles have fewer moving parts and require less equipment. So typically they require less manufacturing to build. The estimates put it at about 30% less.
In general, the body and the chassis, the wheels, the axles, and that kind of thing are probably still going to be very much similar in an EV, in an electric vehicle, as they are in a car today. But the lines that run to drive oil or gas or a number of other fluids around an internal combustion engine aren't going to be there, don't have to be there.
While the processes differ, both types of car are built by workers with lots of specialized knowledge.
And not only that, they trying to move y'all into being autonomous, so they trying to get away from cars altogether as far as needing them on an individual basis for the majority of Americans. They trying to move to a space where, and that's why a lot of these manufacturers are switching over into being technology companies instead of just being auto manufacturers. And one of the things that separate Tesla from other technology companies is that they're using their technology to input or participate in certain industries, not depend on the industry itself. You see the Powerwall, you see Tesla Solar, you see all of these different things in which Tesla is participating in because they understand that every industry is volatile and you don't want to just depend on one thing in order to be successful. You don't want to be a one-trick pony.
The typical person who I think is on a factory floor today probably has at least a 2 or 3 year degree on manufacturing technology.
Really?
That's a big turnaround from my grandfather's day, where the average worker had been to 8th grade.
Tesla is far and away the leading manufacturer of electric vehicles in the United States. But when it comes to motor vehicles, just 3 companies dominate the US industry.
Historically, the big 3 were General Motors.
It's pretty tripped out that Chrysler is now called Stellantis. Stellantis. What is a Stellantis? I don't even know what a Stellantis is.
Ford and Chrysler.
Now, this group is playing catch-up to Tesla's burgeoning empire of battery factories and chargers. Workers in the Rust Belt are now caught in the middle of this corporate showdown.
Oftentimes, when you work for an internal combustion engine, you're working on spark plugs and you're working on certain mechanics of the car. But when you transition to an electric vehicle,
you don't need none of that.
Batteries, and it's a very different kind of job. So there's a lack of understanding as to whether these jobs will dry up or be transferable if there's workforce training, and what kinds of needs the company will have in the future. And so there's this kind of fear or uncertainty about those that are currently in school and how can they even train themselves to be ready for the next jobs that these factories offer.
Which that flies in the face of what I hear people say to me on a regular basis when you talk about, well, you should be able to make $40,000 and be able to support a family. You can forget it, because now you have to be more educated. You have to have greater resources. It's less labor intensive, so you don't have to work as hard on the factory floor. Because I remember one of the reasons why they was giving them 30 and out pensions was because they needed them to stick around long enough to actually be able to get there, which they didn't even anticipate many people getting there. And they did away with the whole pension system at all, right? But you're dealing with an environment in which the competition for a position, which they are starting to move a lot of manufacturing back to the United States of America, but we've already conditioned a lot of people to be lazy. We've conditioned them to be lazy.
Most of this specialized work occurs at secondary factories called OEMs.
An OEM is an original equipment manufacturer. When people talk about OEM, they think about the automaker. They are fed parts from hundreds, if not thousands, of different suppliers, and they produce.
That building right there in the background, I've actually explored that building, and they are going to completely tear it down. And so it's funny that they're using it as a backdrop in order to illustrate something, but I've actually explored that building, and that entire building is being completely razed and torn down. Shout out to Jordan Smith. Jordan Smith says, Anton, they just announced just now that the United States just bought 200 air taxis, 200 air taxis, not taxes, taxis. All right, thank you. 200 air taxis for people to get to and from work for $100 per ride. Look it up. Really? I'm gonna have to check that out. Thank you, Jordan Smith, for the insight. I might do that show tomorrow and add that as a part of the conversation. 200 air taxis. Interesting. But yeah, I explored this building. You can go and look it up on my other channel. It's actually got a decent amount of views. It's got to be at least 100,000, right?
The vehicle for the consumer.
Yep, the old
With
Packer
the
factory.
diversification of the auto industry, the suppliers have really become an integral part of a lot of this.
We are a supplier, an automotive parts supplier to the OEM customer.
NGK Spark Plugs is one of the biggest parts suppliers in the US.
Now think about it. This guy that runs a company that manufactures spark plugs has to pivot. Change is imminent, or they're going to go out of business, because you're not going to need as many suppliers, which is basically what it is, to be able to build these parts for these automakers. Because the automakers are making a transition, and they're even making a transition away from traditional dealerships, and they're only trying to have enough dealerships to be able to service the cars when you have crashes, problems, trouble, issues, recalls, all of those type of things. They don't want as many dealerships because they want to go direct to consumer, which they then have to pay a premium in order for the dealer to be able to service the customer, because Tesla disrupted everything in the same way that Uber and Lyft disrupted the tax industry, right? They want to go direct to consumer, which cuts out the middleman, and they want these dealers to make a capital investment to be able to transition into servicing electric vehicles, which don't even require as much maintenance, which we all know that dealerships make the majority of their money off of the maintenance and the service. And so you want to catch 22, because how many people are going to be disrupted? And y'all keep telling me that we need to have more kids and more babies so that they can work and serve the older people. But technology is advancing so fast in which they're not going to need as many workers to do the things that you do on a regular basis, which is why I keep pushing y'all into going into things like software engineering and cybersecurity and all that other type of stuff, because you're going to have to be educated instead of just dancing and getting water waving degrees, because that's not going to help you, and you're not going to be able to get the jobs that you need to be able to support your city girls. You know what I'm saying?
Large manufacturing operation in Brazil, of course throughout Japan, but also manufacturing in Southeast Asia, in France, and also right here in the United States in West Virginia.
This company and many, many others are changing with the times as governments and car companies commit to EVs.
Told you.
When you go beyond where we are today and we think about the future and the components that are, in an electric vehicle, you've got different types of bearings and other types of rolling elements for electric vehicle motors. And that'll apply to all forms of mobility, whether it's an e-bike or whether it's a autonomous delivery vehicle in the future. So we're diversified, and we expect to become...
You see his key word? He says we're diversified, meaning that they want to get into so many other different ways to manufacture in order to continue to support these large companies, because if they just make spark plugs, they are going to die. You have to change or you are going to die. Change is imminent. Either you evolve or you die, just like newspaper companies.
Even more diversified as this transition occurs.
The big players are changing plans too.
With electric vehicles, some companies like General Motors are trying to pretty much...
They've been spending a lot of time in Detroit lately. What's going on with that?
...get as much in-house as possible, because they believe that they can have a capital advantage as well as diversify their revenue streams by having a product that maybe they could sell to another OEM.
So think about it. This is what they're doing. And I know the auto industry, which is one of the reasons why I pick and choose which companies that I want to invest in based off of my own internal knowledge. Make sure y'all tap into the Patreon. Link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat. But this is what they're doing, which is a complete pivot from what they used to do. They used to outsource everything in order to save costs, which is one of the reasons why you had the rise in Chinese manufacturing and Mexico and Canada and all these other places, right? They used to outsource, but now as these countries continue to grow and they evolve and they become much more modern and they become a greater society, the costs continue to rise. And then, as we've seen during the pandemic, there could be a disruption in the supply chain, and your inability to not only control costs, but control what you can get in order to make enough vehicles to satisfy customer demand is hampering your ability to be profitable and then be accountable to the shareholder. So now what other companies are doing is similar to what Tesla is doing and what General Motors is doing, right? General Motors is saying, listen, we moving everything back in-house, because not only can we control our own fate and our own destinies, but we can also start to sell to other people that then need our services. So what you start to see is a lot of these platforms, and we used to see this all across the board and back in the 2000s and the 90s and the 80s. You would have one car, one platform, and then they would make multiple different vehicles off of it, right? And then they just rebadged it. So a Ford Taurus was really a Mercury Sable, right? An Explorer was, what was it? A Lincoln, not a Nautilus, but an Explorer was a, I don't remember what it was. An Expedition was a Navigator. right? And then it was so interesting, and a lot of people, they would do these JD Power and Associates surveys, and they would think that this Honda whatever is so much better than the Chevy version or the Chevy such and such. And they were both being made in the same plant. So what you're starting to see now is that automakers and other companies at large are racing to be the innovators so that they can then sell the technology and the manufacturing capability and then allow for other people to maybe mark it up and rebadge it or whatever. But they want all of that money and all of that revenue in-house. So they're pivoting with the times and changing so that they can then be a more profitable company, which I believe that there's going to be a shift. All of these different companies, legacy companies, EV makers, whatever. I like what Kia and Hyundai is doing over there. I think that they have a phenomenal product portfolio. I like what they're doing. I like what they're putting together. But you're going to see a shift in which it's a fierce competition to see who's going to be in control of manufacturing and who's going to continue to lead. I love Ford. I love GM. Obviously, I love Tesla. So it is interesting. It is very interesting to see what's going on.
Or even another industry like locomotive or planes or anything like that.
Car manufacturing is one of the most important trades in the United States. Roughly 2.7% of gross domestic product was linked to the production and sale of cars in the States in March of 2021. At its height in 1950, just one city, Detroit, built one of every 2 cars produced in the world.
That's changed.
I mean, Detroit became the Motor City because Henry Ford decided that he would do the Model T, mass produce that, and pay a living wage to blue-collar workers to pretty much come up south, wherever, and work.
He recruited.
Also, unions were huge in the Midwest,
The
and
devil.
that helped the average worker.
Up into the 50s and 60s, benefits and protections for workers was hard to come by. It was because of the UAW and its work with the auto owners.
The UAW also ruined auto manufacturing too.
Insurance, health insurance, dental insurance. The opportunity to retire with a reasonably good retirement package. All of that came about because of the union working with management.
That's not true. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit more insight. Dr. Educated Idiot said, I think these EV manufacturers are dreaming. The U.S. population is growing faster than their manufacturing forecasts. Our economy depends on transportation for workers, small-scale manufacturing. I guess he's saying thumbs down to the small-scale manufacturing. Yeah, but I think that these companies, the manufacturing process is becoming much simpler. The one thing that I see, Dr. Educated Idiot, and thank you for the 10 ball. The one thing that I see happening in the industry is they're simplifying it. So if you look at Tesla, right, one of the things that they're doing with the Cybertruck and the new Model Y and things like that is they're even the actual frame and the actual body of the vehicle is one whole thing, right? Is one. They have a mega press that presses out one entire frame instead of having a multiple different panels and pieces putting it together. So even through that, they're still simplifying the process, and it's all robotic too. But we'll see what happens. Let's continue.
But these clusters of good jobs went away almost as quickly as they appeared. U.S. manufacturing reached an all-time high of 19.6 million workers in the 1970s.
And if you're in the Midwest, that year was probably 1973.
Even more dramatic changes began to unfold in 1994 with the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Yep, that's Trump.
NAFTA.
Now, that was Trump. Trump was the pioneer of the North American Free Trade Agreement. All right? Got to give him some credit on that.
NAFTA will tear down trade barriers between our 3 nations.
In this agreement, Canada, Mexico, and the United States eliminated the taxes that are charged on items that cross borders. With NAFTA in place, North America remained...
Well, Trump redid NAFTA to be more in the favor of American manufacturers. So Trump was the pioneer of continuing to help American companies, seeing the changing headwinds for what's happening in order to make sure that American automakers are not left in the cold and that we don't have to then come back to the front of the save them again. So he's actually putting things in place Appreciate you, big guy. Said twerk responsibly. That is a heck of a name. Y'all got some funny names. Thank you, my friend. So NAFTA was enacted way obviously before Trump took office, but Trump revised it and renegotiated it with Canada and Mexico in order to ensure that there was a more fair way in which we did business between borders.
World-leading producer of passenger and commercial vehicles. Halfway across the planet, Asian countries were developing manufacturing empires of their own. With the admission of China to the World Trade Organization in 2001, competition to make all kinds of durable goods, including cars, heated up. Critics of these policies say they hurt American workers.
The fact is, NAFTA has been a disaster for the United States.
Well, what it did was it allowed companies to outsource and be more profitable, but then at the same time, it eroded American jobs. So we also pushed all of the pollution over to other countries too. And we cleaned up our air a little bit better than they was having over there. And when you went over China, it was like a fog over you. Whereas they were also doing all of the tedious tasks and jobs that we didn't want to do here in America, and we got spoiled.
In office, President Trump renegotiated NAFTA and launched a trade war with China.
Yep.
These moves so far haven't drawn much activity back to the Midwest.
Reversing offshoring or trying to chase more manufacturing jobs through trade policy was likely to be a disappointing public policy because everybody agrees that a large share of factory jobs.
Well, it's not disappointing because you haven't yet seen the fruits of what that is. If you see what's what's happening now, chips manufacturers are starting to bring, and they just passed the CHIPS Act, chip manufacturers are starting to build plants in the United States of America. Tesla just built a plant down south, right? We have a lot more happening as far as them wanting to have manufacturing going on here in the United States of America now, and that takes time to put together. So you can't just say, well, you know, it didn't translate into anything. We haven't seen the fruition of it yet.
Job losses over the past 30, 40 years have been due not to China stealing our jobs or Mexico stealing our jobs, but rather the loss of jobs due to manufacturing workers being more productive. Mostly we think about it as technology. If you went back 100 years ago, we were using hand tightening wrenches. By the 1970s and 1980s, we started seeing computers. So doing this is what makes the economy grow.
But even as the economy grew, the good jobs kept disappearing. Union membership in key industries like auto manufacturing have declined dramatically through 20.
Well, you have to change the definition of what you define as a good job now. It's not working on a line floor because that's not going to be the move anymore. A good job is now the things that I'm pushing you into.
20. The competition for good jobs is more intense than it was in the past.
The contract workers have been around for a long time, but there haven't been as many of them until kind of the last 20 or 30 years. If they need a worker on the line, they can find someone to do that work through an agency rather than having to bring that person onto the workforce.
That is true.
Which saves them money. And at the same time, though, that worker doesn't get the protections that most union workers would get.
As of June 2022, just over 1 million people had jobs in the auto manufacturing sector. More than half worked in the parts trade, which may be impacted by the green transition. Washington lawmakers hope that they can make the pivot.
The bill I'm about to sign is not just about today, it's about tomorrow. It's about delivering progress and prosperity to American families.
In August of 2022, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which included a $10 billion tax credit to build new manufacturing centers for EVs, wind turbines, and solar panels. An additional $2 billion would go toward retooling old factories.
He's wasting his time. It was actually a very, very bad policy. And you also have to take into consideration all of the other stuff that he passed inside of that Inflation Reduction Bill. I don't even know how you name it that. That's silly.
Actually see entire plants shut down or close or have to transition, whereas the assembly plants, for example, might be able to just transfer from one workforce kind of set of skills to another.
The auto industry is laser focused on the new deadlines put forth by leaders in government around the world. The new factories will be highly automated, and workers may need more in-depth training. The changes could disrupt local economies throughout the American Midwest.
The fate of these companies is very intimately tied to the fate of the communities and whether the jobs will be there. But there are other ways that U.S. companies can.
Now, why do you think that the government is so incentivized to make sure that they continue to have people doing these jobs? Well, one of the reasons why they're incentivized to do so is because it helps the tax base, right? The Inflation Reduction Act doesn't actually reduce inflation, right? The only tool that the Fed really has against reducing inflation is to increase rates, which they do on a regular basis, right? They're trying to incentivize people to do the thing that they want them to do by taking advantage of these tax breaks, but then you have to read the rest of the bill to see what they're plugging in there on top of it.
Kind of compensate for this loss of employment. So one is through their supply chains, and the other is through domestic production, increasing domestic production.
President Biden is hoping that some of these workers can pivot gracefully. His $52.7 billion investment in semiconductors could draw more companies to the States.
So that's the thing. You can't. The one thing that we seen during 2008, right, was they tried to incentivize people to go into different industries that were losing their jobs in manufacturing. And I've seen it here in Detroit. Now, a lot of these people that were older and they, whatever, so on and so forth, they just were not interested at all. They were not interested. They didn't have the motivation to pivot because they didn't see a way, or they didn't see themselves doing anything different than what they were doing automatically. And so it's going to be a hard sell to get people to do anything different than what they've already been doing for an extended period of time. It's going to be a hard sell. And so you're going to have to get people very early, 20s, 30s, 40s, for them to actually want to do the things that's best for them.
Today is a day for builders. Today, America is delivering.
This new law will attempt to wrest critical industries from the grips of Eastern countries. For example, semiconductors were invented in the US, but today, Asian companies dominate the global market.
Over half of the batteries used in the U.S. come from companies that are based in South Korea, Japan, and China. So there's this big opportunity for the U.S. to invest more in the batteries so as to bring them into domestic companies and therefore kind of offset the loss of employment.
You're not going to offset the loss of employment. The only thing you can do is try to educate people on how they can do things differently from the get-go. People have to be incentivized enough within themselves, not just from the federal government, in order to do something different. You know what industry I did see a lot of people pivot into that lost their jobs in the auto manufacturing industry? A lot of them pivoted over to healthcare. I know a lot of guys that wound up becoming nurses, and they did much greater things than they were doing on the line. And they actually are very thankful that they lost their job because it forced them into doing other things that they wouldn't have normally did. I'm thankful. Well, I didn't lose my job as a matter of getting laid off when I was working at the steel plant. I lost my job because I was fumbling the bag, but I'm thankful that I lost my job. I lost it at the worst possible time. I'm thankful that I lost my job because it actually pushed me into doing what it is that I'm doing today, into my real purpose.
Manufacturing back, while important, are for now largely speculative.
Yes, EVs are growing and are coming, but it's not the profit driver at this point.
But companies far from the Midwest are determined to make an impact. Tesla got its start in California, and that state is planning to ban the sale of gasoline cars by 2035.
Gas is going away, ladies and
At
gentlemen.
the end of the day, it's about actually making green. And these companies
Look at this
saw
guy's
the rise.
hair. I'm sorry. If you know you're going on, listen, I flew out to LA. I got to pivot for a second. I flew out to LA a couple days ago in order to be able to do some things. And I made sure that my beard was tight, my head was shaved, everything. Look at this guy. Why do we have this comb over? Why didn't he go and talk to the local barbers in the city? Because it's some fire barbers. He could have got him a hairpiece. Yo, he could have got him one of them glue-on head top things. He could have fixed this. There's no reason why he should be looking like this with his hair like this. We're going to have to do better. Get on camera and do better, sir.
Of Tesla, that I think led the way for a lot of companies rather than that traditional ESG.
The most important question that remains is how soon demand for EVs will materialize. Sales have stretched to 9% of the global car market, according to the International Energy
Said he got that Chicken Little going on.
Agency.
Unless we can make that change and make it pretty quickly,
He must have been a union
bigger
steward.
Problems to deal with. And so I think we all know we have to do.
See that guy out there working in that tire shop? Y'all don't even want him. Y'all don't want him. Y'all not interested in talking to this guy. You want to talk to that guy that's a high value man. You don't want a Henry. You want an HVM.
There was an overwhelming sentiment among auto workers that they had earned the right to build the next American car because they had devoted their entire careers, their entire professions, including their knees and their bodies to building these cars. And this coincides with these feelings of uncertainty that they don't know if they will actually be able to be a part of
See
this.
that exhaust has gone away. I think that he got to be making a Corvette, I believe. That looked like the exhaust of a Corvette. I don't know. It might be. Looked like the exhaust of a Corvette.
New revolution.
Or the old
I
Corvette.
don't think that Midwest customer is ready for an exclusively electric vehicle household. We just simply don't have the charging infrastructure, not only in the Midwest, but really across the entire United States. So it's going to take a little bit more time. The Midwest is becoming more open-minded. I do think we'll see.
Oh, I ain't got time for you to become open-minded. Get your ass together because we got to get these jobs. We got to get this bag.
A gradual transition as long as the infrastructure is in place and the cars are affordable.
So Spencer Campbell says, under the Obama administration, a Michigan company received a $186 million grant to build EV batteries. 5 years later, sold it to a Chinese company. If that is true, that is unfortunate, which is one of the reasons why it doesn't always translate as far as a public policy incentivizing companies to do anything. You just going to have to compete on a global scale or you're going to get left behind. Shout out also to my dog, Brock. Brock says, pass a love offering. Happy to be a member of the Greater Bag Chasers, Episcopalian, Missionary, Non-Denominational Christian Baptist Church. Look at that, y'all. Y'all ain't think I was going to catch all of them words. Anton know how to read. Shout out to my dog, Brock. I appreciate you for always supporting the platform. Thank you, everybody, for continuing to rock with me. I appreciate y'all. I love y'all. Make sure you do the thing that is in your best interest. It is a Friday Eve. I will be on the Peef Let's Talk as usual tonight. Everything is going awesome. Everything is going well. So no chicks for the streets today, but you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And everything is going well. So make sure y'all join the Bag Chasers this week, today, and 2 days from now. No, 3 days from now, too. I got an exclusive interview from somebody y'all gonna love. Make sure y'all tap into the Patreon. Link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat. If you need to get in touch with me, email me at antondaniels413@gmail.com and we're gonna get you popping. I love you and I appreciate you, but I need you to do me one more favor before we get up out of here, friends. One more favor. Make sure you share this with your family and friends. We don't want to be rich by ourselves. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. I think that you guys are absolutely, positively awesome and phenomenal. I am going to continue to pour into you every single day. I love y'all. I'm going to talk to y'all tomorrow. Peace.